So just a quick thank you to everyone who's taken the time out of your day today to join today. It's going to be hosted by myself, Andrew Luthwaite. I'm a pre-sales lead here at Avolution Software. And today, essentially, we want to go through enterprise architecture road mapping in 2023, but also just highlighting some of the key Abacus features. And for those of you who are Abacus users already, I guess maybe just an overview of some of the new features that we've introduced recently as well. For those of you who are not Abacus users and maybe new to Avolution itself, I just want to quickly go through a bit of a background in terms of who we are as a company. And so we've been essentially around for 21 years or so now. I've been here for probably half of that time, maybe 10 years or so. And we have offices worldwide. So what that really means is that we have the capability to support our customers across any region and also across any industry. Hopefully that's been highlighted as well within the analyst reports. So those of you who are familiar with things like Gartner's Magic Quadrant and Forrester Wave reports, hopefully you'll see that we've actually been leading those areas as well for the past 6 years or so. We've also got thousands of Abacus users worldwide, which means we've got an active community of users, and they're sharing stories of how they've used Abacus, they're sharing content they're producing in Abacus, and also it helps other users collaborate across industries as well. As a tool itself, we also support a number of different frameworks and notations. And we say unlimited in here because you can actually build your own. You can actually combine frameworks with each other. But we then also support some of the more industry standard ones, which hopefully some of you are aware, including things like TOGAF, Archimates, BPMN, and some reference here to specific industry notations and frameworks like Bayern and Accord as well. So this view might actually look quite familiar to those of you who have seen things like Gartner's Hype Cycle before, but actually this one is a bit more around enterprise architecture in general. We're all at different stages of our EEA journey, and any given day, of course, we might flip between each of these different stages, whether we're working in the innovation phase, whether we're actually looking at that peak of inflated expectations when we might first introduce EA to the organization. Typically, we're all going through different stages at different times. Now, there are some, I guess we classified these as mega trends, but really what we're actually looking at here are some of the key things that we see in the industry today. So continual transformation and remodeling. This has been a big thing that we've seen across our organizations that we've worked with, and of course, all of our customers and organizations, whether that's universities, non-profits, to large corporates. And we're continually seeing there's a need for transformation within the organization. More so, of course, by things like the pandemic that have happened, and transformation becomes forced in some states. So certainly having something like an EA tool in those areas can also help. Cost management is another area. There's a huge focus on cost, of course, generally across organizations. But we are seeing a bit more focus these days on cloud cost management and multi-cloud environments. Certainly with people working from home much more these days, having all of the services and applications they use as cloud-based has placed greater importance, if you like, on the need to focus on this area as well. And then finally, we've also got cybersecurity on this list. I guess coupled with operational risk, security again for our customers is a big, I say, trend, but hopefully just becomes one of those things that stays around. And certainly, like I've mentioned, remote working, business continuity, of course, is really important. But the idea is that we're effectively combining that with some industry standards as well. Okay, so NIST and SABSA provide some good basis for things like cybersecurity. And as much as they are good references and standards, even if you are compliant with these or compliant with something like GDPR, compliancy doesn't necessarily mean you're secure. It certainly helps in terms of audits and certainly helps in terms of best practice, but cybersecurity is a continuous role, if you like, not just a case of abiding by a framework, but actually delivering and actioning those frameworks as well. And then we come on to, I guess, what we've seen as more EA trends. And there's a focus here, I guess, both on internal and external forces coming to play. Certainly, enterprise architects are the most widely read and attended. Many of the different Gartner conferences and events we've been to. But really, enterprise architecture as a term, we are actually seeing much more of a divided audience. And I say divided, hopefully also that means it's more collaborative. It's not just EAs that we're dealing with. We're dealing with solution architects, analysts, project managers, various domains and industries that we're working with has hopefully and clearly from our experience been extended beyond the traditional EA role, if you like. Now, with that, of course, comes these trends. And the first one here is evident of the fact that the EA trend has moved in certain directions. And having industry specific knowledge, cloud specific knowledge is becoming crucial. Certainly as that landscape widens, organizations need to have much more of a wider view of the IT decisions they're making that actually inform some of the actual business outcomes. And that means making sure that the decision making process is actually being made on more reliable informations. Now, the EA team, of course, have to be a pivotal part of that particular process. And really, the role is there to keep their colleagues accurately informed. So, industry specific knowledge, patterns within organizations, algorithms that can be used across the organization, and becomes a key part of not just the EA team, but also people's personal profile as well. The second one in here, automated analysis, does go slightly hand in hand with the first in here around cloud-specific knowledge, and it's actually using the data that you have available and making automatic decisions from that. So leveraging algorithms, which is a key part of what you'll see today as well, to make sure that decisions are being made on accurate data. So algorithms can work, of course, for different purposes, whether it's to understand costs throughout the organization, understanding complexity and compliance. Algorithms should be there to help make those decisions, not necessarily make those decisions on your behalf. Machine learning has been a key thing that we've been working on, certainly as an organization, and I've been leading the way here from an enterprise architecture perspective. And you will hear a bit more about this later on as well. The next on the list here is the visibility and discoverability. For those of you who kind of sat on some of the WebExes that we've done before, and certainly the ones I've done, I've tried to emphasize this point across most of the talks we've done around the communication aspects within organizations. Arguably, we're picking a tool these days to have a central source of information, a single source of truth, if you like. But part and parcel of that is actually having an organization that can actually communicate the results from that single source of truth, making sure it's discoverable to the wider organization, and making sure that actually anyone in the organization has visibility of the work that's going on. So a tool can be used to build that single source of truth. But again, like most things these days, it's a people problem, not a tool problem. And there has to sometimes be a shift internally of where that enterprise architecture team is focused on and how they can actually help. In most cases, they do, I've seen, extend that communication aspect across the organization. And slightly maybe tongue in cheek for death of spreadsheets. Of course, we don't see spreadsheets dying away. They'll never go away. They are critical to many parts of the organization. However, what we're actually seeing is that they're not necessarily going to be the core data store. Now, of course, that is still the case in some organizations. However, we are seeing a need to move away from that. We're going to see that tools are going to be popping up for specific industries and domains. Accountants might use specific software, project teams use specific software, Monday.com and Trello, etc. And these tools are popping up very quickly, and arguably quicker than maybe internal IT teams can deal with their adoption. Maybe not necessarily through the right channels either. So it is seeing the fact that spreadsheets have their use, but just like enterprises have moved to Teams and Slack, EAs also are finding the need to move to their own tools as well. This, of course, aids in the idea of managing the complexity within organizations. There has to be a tool available to run more appropriate analysis across that data. Tools, especially EA tools, should be acting as a bit more of a platform these days as well, where we're actually connecting to other sources via things like APIs. So all of these EA trends are things that we've seen across organizations that we've worked with. And certainly one of the things that we want to do today is cover how Abacus can hopefully help with some of these trends as well. Now, there was a survey that was run, arguably this was last year, but really this was a survey of 1,000 architects, or over 1,000 architects, in fact, around their top priorities in terms of goals and use cases. So maybe just a quick shout out and a thank you to everyone who actually took part in that survey. But on here, you can see those trends from our customers directly and from our audience directly. And you can see, of course, road mapping change, application portfolio management, two of the top within these trends, which is no surprise. I guess application portfolio management has become the bread and butter of most EA tools these days. And certainly road mapping change is critical across any of these use cases. But you can also see things like tackling technical debt and cybersecurity are on this list. So tackling technical debt, we've again provided extensive WebExes on how best to tackle that particular use case. And certainly some tips there would be looking at things like application portfolio management aspects, converting some of the more technical domain KPIs you capture into more cost-specific ones or business-friendly ones. And likewise for cybersecurity, it's essentially why we've moved to help with things like NIST and SABSA frameworks embedded into some of the cloud migration efforts we've worked on through the algorithms as well. You can also see some other topics that were actually suggested as trends. Again, you're actually going to see a lot more of this on our community and through our consultants as well, who can actually offer specific advice on each of these use cases. So it is really good to see, of course, there's some strong correlation between all of these use cases. And obviously good to see that we're actually on the right page. The stuff that we want to work on as vendors seems to be aligning really well with obviously what our customers actually want to be working on as well. So now we'll take a look specifically at some of the changes we've made in Abacus in its most recent release. We have tied these to some of the trends, but really it's just because we've noticed that the features we've released have proven, I guess, to be quite useful for these particular use cases. And keep in mind, of course, these are general features within the tool itself, and we will be showing more of a live view of this at the end to highlight some of the other new things we've introduced. So for this particular one, and we've actually gone ahead and made some significant changes to diagramming within Abacus Enterprise. And what you're seeing on the screen here is the ability for users to actually drill down into tree maps and actually edit the properties of their applications or any other object directly from that view. They can also show some optional properties, so those who may have some of these hidden initially, they can actually drill straight into those from the details page from any of these views, and this particular use case showing that from a tree map. The next one is actually the ability to drill also into the actual connections. Okay, so you can do this directly from the diagrams within Abacus Enterprise. You can go through to the details page for these particular connections. That's obviously been a big change for a lot of our users. We treat components and connections, so the objects and relationships, on par with each other within Abacus. They both have the same rules that can be set up. They both have attributes that can be created, and they can also both be reused across different diagrams as well. So a really important aspect of what our customers have been asking for and what we've delivered in this case as well. And finally, what we've also done is look to scale Abacus Enterprise according to the screen that you're working on. I'll show this again later on in a bit more of a live environment, but really useful if you're working off your desktops and widescreen monitors, all the way then to moving to something like your tablets or your mobile phones. Abacus Enterprise will now scale according to the screen that you're on. Again, so subtle changes, but stuff that's been really useful for those who actually need access to this data quickly and easily. And certainly these are just some of the aspects we're changing within Abacus Enterprise. The next few changes actually fall into the automated analysis trend. And within Abacus, we've always had the ability of building algorithms. And algorithms provide us with the ability to actually navigate through the entire model and aggregate data up and down that model. So initially, we had this for the different components within the model. So this particular one looks at specific budgets across specific groupings, and then can actually sum all of those to provide the budget for the next 5 years. What we've done in our next release is actually expanded on this by also allowing the ability to run this across connections in the model. So now we can pass properties or attributes across components and across connections. Again, a really powerful way of actually automating some of the analysis that gets run in Abacus, and using the connections will open the door to a whole bunch of new innovative algorithms that we can see our customers building. Visibility and discoverability, I've mentioned earlier on, has been one of my key things I like to work on in terms of communicating EA across the organization. And there's nothing better really than some of the new enhancements we've made to some of the search capabilities. So you're always able to search the entire model in Abacus for something specific, but now you can be much more specific and apply filters. So these filters are going to work across specific architectures, maybe specific component types or connection types. And you might also want to filter so that you're only searching on either names, properties, or descriptions as well. So this has become, of course, a big thing for our users. Initially, when we talk about enterprise architecture, we also think of the wider organization being involved. And certainly through Abacus Enterprise, making things easily discoverable, making it very simple for users to create their own search criteria and find exactly what they're looking for, becomes even more important as that data set grows as well. And then finally is that death of spreadsheets that we've mentioned. Now, again, like we've said, death of spreadsheets really isn't on the cards, but what we're actually seeing is more of a single source of truth for this type of data. And we're also leveraging the ability to have this within something like Abacus that every user can actually contribute to. And I say every user because we may have users who have editing capabilities who can actually update lists of content in the live repository. We may have users modeling within the repository. And then we may have users who are actually creating current states, future states, and different scenarios as well. More importantly, what you're actually seeing on the screen here is the highlighted red cells is Abacus actually suggesting what these values could be. So this is part of the machine learning program that we're actually running internally, and customers already have access to this capability out of the box. And you can actually see how Abacus is providing different recommendations for these applications. So not just the attributes, but it's also actually indicating that there may be specific services internally that these particular applications are implemented by as well. So machine learning becomes a critical part of the algorithms. Algorithms are going to be great for building your own formulas. And if you just want to fill in the blanks, Ask Abacus can be a key feature that can be used in line with some of the machine learning capabilities that we have. And when we're on the topic of obviously death of spreadsheets, the idea as well, when we have this list of information, is lists aren't always the best view to show your audience. We have other team members within Avolution who have also provided WebExes on the best types of visualization on the data that you have. So I'd certainly recommend taking a look at those. But really this aspect is just trying to highlight that when you are building views within Abacus, you want to leverage the different charts and dynamic views that we have available, not just the ability to have list-based views. Lists are going to be really useful once you have a filtered view, but these types of charts, again, just provide a slightly more intuitive way for people to navigate through their models. And we've made some subtle changes to how these actually work together and how some of the icons and some of the notation actually works on these particular charts as well. And finally, from an update perspective, before we just jump into a quick, let's say, live version of the changes we've made, are some of the frameworks. So we've actually expanded some of the initial frameworks we have around cloud migration projects we've worked on. And one of the needs was to actually expand our cloud library of icons. So AWS is one of those we've always had out of the box for some time now, but we've just again extended on this. And we've also introduced ones from Azure and Google Cloud. So regardless of what domain you're working in, those users who actually need to model this type of work in Abacus, solution architects and infrastructure architects, they can now leverage these out-of-the-box cloud notation libraries to be used across their projects. And just before jumping into a bit more of a live demonstration, it's worth focusing on the kind of three pillars of what we focused on in terms of development of Abacus, and certainly where we're headed over the next 12 months or so around the features that we develop and really the kind of audience that we're aiming Abacus at as well. The first is speed and performance. Now, we've noticed a significant change in the amount of data that users want to bring into something like Abacus, whether that's leveraging connections to things like ServiceNow, Technopedia, and SharePoint, bringing in all their diagrams from things like Visio, or just using the API to connect to a number of different sources. So our focus, or one of our focus points, is going to be improving the speed and performance of the tool. Now, currently, Abacus can hold millions of data sets in there, and we have customers who are already doing that. So really, speed and performance is more just that we can actually support our clients as they scale and as they increase the number of users that they have. And that, of course, is a big priority and a number one priority for us. The second is around the enterprise functionality. So for those of you who are aware, of course, we have two parts to Abacus, Abacus Studio and Abacus Enterprise. And Abacus Enterprise is the platform that the wider organization is using, whether it's unlimited number of read-only users in your organization, all the way down to those who need editing access. We're expanding on the enterprise functionality. So again, that's going to help with that communication phase I've mentioned. We want you to have the ability to build your own styles of dashboards. We kind of anticipate, if you like, the increased engagement across the organization. I mentioned earlier on, PMO teams, analysts, C-levels, all of those users will likely want to have access to that data. So we've put a lot of focus on enterprise, really just trying to democratize EA a bit more by just increasing the functionality and accessibility of those cloud-based diagrams and catalogs within that particular platform. And finally, a heavy focus on UI and UX. Now, as we have more users involved, not just internally, of course, but our external customers and not just enterprise architects, we are keeping UI and UX in mind throughout the entire design phase of everything that we build. And so we're always looking to kind of refresh some aspects of Abacus. And it's certainly what we've been doing in the most recent release and what we'll actually continue doing in the future releases as well. Now, one of the challenges here, of course, is actually as we have an evolved design within the tool and within the user interface, our development team are constantly juggling, the range of requirements that we have and fitting those with some of the technical constraints and limitations, and how to actually stage those improvements as we go forward as well. Because all the content we produce in terms of the tool, we also want our customers to produce visually pleasing designs. We want our users to actually share the work that they've been doing across their organization. That, of course, also means extending on the accessibility improvements, which have also been significant in this particular release, but will continue to do so across every other release of Abacus as well. And those fall into, of course, the ability to have screen reader solutions, announcements being made when you open different windows, and having your own options for choosing specific color values for things like tooltips within some of the charts. So what I want to do is jump into Abacus very quickly, just to show you some of those key concepts I've mentioned so far. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with Abacus Enterprise to highlight some of those. So the first thing I mentioned was some of the changes we've made to the charts within Abacus Enterprise and some of the diagrams. So if I jump into one of these dashboards, you'll now notice on one of these diagrams, we have the actual options this time, rather than just an overall edit function. We can now choose whether we're in view or edit mode. So that becomes really useful on specific diagrams you're building, where you simply want to move things around without accidentally moving some of these components. And I can actively enter edit mode to try different layout styles, add new components, or create some new connections. So it's one of the main things that we've added into this new release. As well as improved zoom capabilities in here, and also, like I mentioned earlier on, that dashboards will now fit to screen sizes. That's been a big improvement throughout the model as well. Likewise, for some of these charts, we will actually now show list properties on some of these axes as actual values rather than the order they appear as within that list. So again, just making things a bit more seamless for users to actually interact with this data. Through those slides, you've of course seen a lot of Abacus Enterprise. So what I want to do is just jump into Abacus Studio and just highlight some of the key things we've been doing in here as well. So interestingly, when we actually look at Abacus Studio, and we have a number of different architectures that we can actually build. And I'm currently logged in as a user who may only have read-only access to some of these architectures as well. The useful thing we've added in is if I hover over my user, I can actually see what permissions I've been assigned in terms of product features, and I can also see which user groups I'm part of as well. So it's a quick thing just to take a look at some of the permissions I actually have as the current user who's logged in. But within these architectures, we then have all the different types of catalogs and diagrams we're building. And on any of these views, so if we take maybe something like a business capability map, I can see all the content on here. And I can also see all the different options I have to actually filter content, show this content in Explorer window, all the usual content which you'd hopefully see in this model as well. The main change we've made is that each of these objects can now actually be linked to other architectures. So I can link each process or capability to a view or a catalog that's been created in another architecture. Really useful when you have things like current states and future states. It makes it much easier to actually navigate through the model that way. We've also improved how we actually manage different passwords within Abacus. Those of you who are using single sign-on, of course, for the majority of our customers, we now have enforcement levels we can apply to some of the password options. So again, some of the more administrative functions we've actually edited in here in terms of this particular release, but will certainly help with some of the security teams to abide by more stricter password rules as well. The other key thing is typically when we have a structured model like this, we have this kind of hierarchy of parent-child relationships. And previously dragging these around to change the parent sometimes would have been a bit of an issue if we have a lot of changes we want to make. Now it's much easier to actually highlight some of these and change their parent by specifically selecting the area in the model you want to change the parent to, rather than dragging up and down the hierarchy in here. So again, much easier to now actually drill down into the specific area rather than just dragging them in the Explorer tree. And like I've mentioned, we've also made a number of accessibility improvements in the model. So this would include, of course, screen readers, which I've already mentioned, and the ability to actually customize some of the coloring notations, not just for the views that you create, but also for some of the menu options in here as well. For those of you who are new to Abacus, one of the things I also want to do is quickly go over some of the key functionality, specifically, of course, around enterprise architecture modeling and some of the road mapping functionality within Abacus as well. So the first thing you're seeing is that we're actually in what we call Abacus Enterprise. There's two parts to Abacus, for those of you who know. Abacus Enterprise is effectively our dashboarding environment, and Abacus Studio is where we can have all of our core users to build things like our integrations, model multiple architectures, and as also use some of the configuration and administrative functions as well. But within Abacus Enterprise, collaborating on the actual data itself and of course on all the architecture content is really why you would be using something like Abacus Enterprise. So to give you an example, let's jump into one of these application dashboards. And what you're actually going to be seeing here is a number of different visualizations, ranging from things like tree maps, diagrams, catalogs full of data, and various charts depicting some of those data elements as well. And this is where we really think of the collaboration efforts within Abacus. We're connecting multiple data sources together. We have application portfolios likely connected to things like our technology landscape and our business capabilities and processes. Also, we can see some reference to some org charts that we have in here as well. We have users pulling in this data from other tools, whether that's importing content from Visio, connecting to things like ServiceNow or Technopedia, or just utilizing some of the standard Excel, Google Sheets imports as well. All of the content within these catalogs will likely have specific KPIs we want to capture. And again, some of these could be coming specifically via the API to other tools that you're also using. The other key thing for these types of views, if I jump to more of a business-based view, is actually managing some of the data and some of the diagramming functionalities as well. So if we take a look at this particular capability map, we can actually see we have a specific link here to one of the processes that we've built within Abacus. And on this, we can actually make some data changes. Now, as a modeler user, we could actually enter the edit mode in here and actually move some of this content around or actually add new content. But we can also take a look at one of these processes and actually change some of the attributes on this particular step. So this is going to allow us to use some of the predefined drop-down fields that have already been defined in Abacus, whether that's from some of your key users, or in this case, potentially from some of the standards and notations that we support out of the box as well. We can also look to see which departments may perform this particular task, and therefore we can choose from an existing set of departments, again, that may have been imported via the API, or quite likely imported through other methods from other users as well. Now, road mapping, of course, is also a key step within any organization. If we take a quick look at something like an application rationalization strategy, one of the reasons we might actually want to rationalize applications is potentially the lack of investment in certain applications, the duplication of applications that may be supporting the same process or capability. But one of the key views here is to actually utilize these Gantt chart views. You'll notice actually we're starting this from the top level of capabilities. And what we can effectively do is drill down through the capability levels into the individual processes and even into some of the sub-processes in here as well. And what we'll find is the specific life cycle dates that we've captured on each of these applications that support that overall process. And this is the benefit of road mapping on a dashboard, is it's not just an isolated view. As I was drilling down through that view, our lists of applications are going to filter, and you'll also see our charts filter as well. In this case, the end of life date for a number of different applications, also indicating the number of users. Again, really useful for impact analysis. We want to know the disruption it might cause if we do actually retire some of these applications. Again, these are also color-coded, so we can see that we're actually only retiring maybe 3 of these applications and maybe investing in only 3 of these as well. So it's not always the case that we're retiring all of those, and we might want to filter that even further just to see those applications. Now, some of these applications in this list will also have other links across the model, and one of the key ways of actually visualizing that is through what we call like a dependency analysis. So I'm going to remove the filters from this view. And I'm going to jump to a technology dashboard. Now, a dependency analysis really is the idea of utilizing something like GraphView within Abacus. And this allows us to navigate through the entire model to see all of the relationships that we've modeled.
And this idea of using graph view is to emphasize the interactiveness of this view. So this is different to a diagram, which we may want to partly auto-generate, maybe produce manually, usually produced for a specific point in time. But these graph views are dynamic and accessible to any users within Abacus Enterprise. And those users might take the approach of focusing potentially on some of the operating systems that we have internally. They might also want to drill down into one of those specific technologies to see all of its dependencies across the model. Now, I'm logged in as a super user in this case, so I'm actually going to be able to see all of the content, whether that's dependencies to applications, infrastructure, or other technologies in here as well. Other users, of course, may have a specific focus on infrastructure, so they can drill down even further to see things like network elements, any projects that are running that may affect that particular piece of infrastructure, or any of the other content that's actually been modeled in here as well. Now, when we actually drill down through these impact views, there are other considerations to keep in mind. We actually want to help automate some of the calculations we make around these views. So that could be effectively using some of these heat mapping effects to calculate cost. We can use this type of graph view to attribute costs up and down the model. And that can also be the same for things like risks, reliability, or any other trends within any of the metrics you're actually capturing. A key way to highlight those key metrics is to use something like a trade-off dashboard. So this is a really popular view, especially when we think of the type of architectures that users will create. Typically, those architects are using Studio to model multiple architectures. This is effectively the ability to model different scenarios or different time landscapes. But effectively, for our stakeholders, we actually want to pull this up to the top level. So using some of the no-code algorithms out of the box, we want to be able to calculate things like costs, maybe availability of our applications in this case, and potentially the number of applications or the complexity of that landscape. And by using a trade-off view, so comparing something like an as-is state to an application rationalization project, so a future state, we can then run through what that trade-off is. And so at times the cost may reduce and maybe the unavailability increases. Maybe our complexity decreases, but our costs increase. Maybe our overall risk portfolio decreases, but our level of compliance may increase. So there's always a trade-off between these architectures, and it's useful to have these KPI portlets at a top level to show specific stakeholders, specific attributes within the model. Now, there's a whole bunch of other use cases and enterprise architecture goals, if you like, that our customers would use Abacus for. Some of these are actually listed through the different types of dashboards that we have here. So, for example, some users are focused on a specific compliance mission. So if we think of something like GDPR, we're looking at security classification of our data, where that's stored and who has access to that data. For our risk team, that also may go hand in hand with something like GDPR these days. But from a risk team specifically, we're looking at maybe business risks and technology risks, the likelihood of those actually coming into effect and the impact that would have on the organization. And then obviously the number of different relationships that we've mapped to which applications, processes, and departments would be affected by those risks as well. So there are a whole bunch of different use cases. You'll find a lot more on our website as well, and also some very specific customer case studies where they've used Abacus for cloud migration projects, using Abacus's algorithms to calculate things like technical debt scores, and also to some of the more standard stuff hopefully you'd see from an EA team, things like application portfolio management and road mapping effectively in Abacus.
Now, again, unfortunately, we don't have time to go through every single feature we've introduced, but I would highly recommend you take a look at the community that has a full list of all the features we've introduced into this particular release. It will also give you some insight into the ones we're working on as well. So a quick final thank you to all of you, though, have joined today. I realize, of course, time-wise, it's going to be different for each region, but I'm aware we've got people joining across the world, so appreciate all the time you've taken out of today. And hopefully it's been useful for you to see, again, for those Abacus users, some of the new stuff we have, And those of you who are new to Abacus can see some of the ways we're actually improving and enhancing the product as we go forward. Luckily, we do actually have some time for questions. So what we'll do is we'll open the floor to questions. Please write anything into the Q&A functionality. And of course, we'll get back to you and read those off and hopefully answer as many as we can live on the call today. Thank you.